We are joined now by Chris Balas of the Wolverine on three's Michigan site, and Chris has been very, very busy of late. Chris, this is a strange spot for you because you got to deliver the news, but you know your audience is entirely made up of Michigan fans. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, well, first of all, people are like mad. You got to take sides. I had a couple guys today say, you got to take sides here and stand with the program and blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, I got to report the news, man, the good and the bad, right? And right now it's not good news. So, yeah, we're going to tell you when it's good. And, yeah, we're going to tell you when it's bad. And right now it's pretty bad. And even worse, Andy, when you look at the Washington Post article that came out today with more alleged misgivings, I guess you would call them, from that it seemed to implicate more than one Michigan staffer, more than just Connor Stalions. So it's tough. You know, it is tough because there's been so much good these last couple of years. And now no matter what they accomplish, Andy, everybody's going to say, oh, it's because of this. You know, this team could go out and win the national championship and prove hammering Penn State and Ohio State and everybody else that, hey, it wasn't about the sign stealing, but it's all going to come back and everybody's going to say that's exactly what it was.
And that is the toughest part for these players because they obviously had nothing to do with that part of it. They may benefit from it, they may not, but it will kind of just ride with them too, unfortunately. And so you reported earlier this week that the NCAA is expected to be in Ann Arbor on Thursday. You mentioned that Washington Post story by Will Hobson, and it does seem like there's more of a paper trail than initially was put out there. How tough is that with, you know, if all of that's true, that if there's a budget and there's someone supervising it, how much worse does that make it?
Yeah, terrible. I mean, and there's always more to it, right? That's why last week when everybody was calling it a witch hunt, you know, we'd heard some rumblings. We're saying, okay, let's wait and see what happens and wait and see what the evidence is. And this week, everybody's piling on. And I said, let's wait and see what the evidence is. And everybody thinking, okay, this is the end of it. This is the end of it. And we're thinking, probably not, because we did know. And I spoke with you earlier today that there were allegations that Connor Stalions, the analyst behind all of this, might have been at some Michigan opponent games recently himself.
Yeah,
exactly. In person. So number one, that's okay. All of a sudden it's not just people he hired, it's him. Right. Number two, where was he? That'll be interesting. I think when that leaks and people will see that. Number three, though. Yeah. If you have, as the Washington Post says, if you have other coaches accessing this computer, supposedly, allegedly, then it implicates more than obviously than Connor Stalions and indicates that maybe more people knew about it. So we have to see who. I think the article did say that Jim Harbaugh was not one of them and that there was no trail to him. If there's a saving grace for him, at least for his reputation, maybe that's it. And he can say, I didn't know any of this was going on. But as the NCAA has said, Andy, and as you know, it comes back down to you need to know what's going on at your program. So it's going to be fascinating to see where this goes from here. We will see if the NCAA does make it in tomorrow. I did confirm with two different sources that was the initial date. You know, maybe with more information here, and I've got to assume, right, Andy, that they've got all this information that the Washington Post does, but what they approach Michigan with and what they plan to do about it.
Yeah, and the Washington Post is citing an outside investigative firm that was kind of put on this case. I would imagine by another school or by some interested party.
Yeah.
So let your imaginations run wild on that. I'm sure we're going to find out eventually who that was.
Yes.
But it is, guys. So this is just the weirdest, most college football case. Because I was talking about this on a radio show earlier today, and it was, when you think about it on its face, it's crazy because you're saying you can't video or actually just can't go watch something that is taking place in front of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And I get it. The rule's been in place since 1994. You have to, but it's funny because like when this story escapes our little college football bubble and is on Get Up or is on something that's more of a, mainstream all sports kind of show, nobody understands it. Nobody even understands why it's against the rules. So it's just bizarre. And I'm sure for fans, it's pretty baffling as well.
Here's why it's against the rules is because they implemented it as a cost-cutting measure in 1994. And of course, this is before cell phones and stuff, but anybody could bring a video camera in if they wanted to. And there was nothing preventing it before then. Yeah. And some big old thing, right? In 1994, they were smaller, but in 2021, they actually thought about it was proposed that they overturn the rule anyway, saying,
Yeah.
we know all this stuff is going on. If you're naive if you don't think that there are students sending film in to Alabama saying, hey, here are the sidelines, here's the plays they ran, and so on and so forth. But there was no coordinated effort or no evidence of it like we see here. So it would be very Michigan to be busted doing something that a lot of other people do, right, and get in trouble for it. And we'll see what Michigan's response is. I do know from what we've heard that, especially in lieu of the new evidence, they will probably be begging for mercy and saying, hey, I wouldn't call it rolling over, but I would say, okay, what's the medicine? What do you guys have in mind? Do I think it's going to be anything pertaining to this year? No, and neither do they. In terms of, okay, you can't go to the playoff and you can't do this and you can't do that. And I certainly don't think anything's going to come of the Big Ten from what they understand as well. But you never know with the NCAA, right? And we're going to find out soon enough. But it's so fascinating because in 2018 and 2019, Michigan was convinced when Ohio State was running up record numbers. Ohio State knew their every play, right? And they're like, how is this happening? So, is this their response to it? Doesn't matter, what it was. If they were doing it legally and they found a way during a game or something like that, there's no evidence that they didn't. So, but again, such a Michigan thing, and really does put a stain on this season, sadly, for those kids who are probably the best team in the country.
And the best team Michigan's had, certainly in the Jim Harbaugh era, and
Yes.
probably the best team Michigan's had for a long time. Now, you saw the budget for those tickets. You heard the Washington Post story. I wonder if they were using Game Time. They should have been using Game Time. Our partner Game Time has all the best tickets to all the best events. You can get anything to any sporting event, any concert, any comedy show. They've got it, even if it's sold out. So what do? You go on the Game Time app, you type in the event you want. So this week, maybe you want to go see Florida play Georgia in Jacksonville in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Or maybe you want to see Oregon play Utah at Rice-Eccles Stadium, in beautiful Rice-Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City. Game Time has your tickets. In fact, you can get into the cocktail party for under $100 as a Monday. And what you do is you go to the app, you find the game, you click the ticket, it shows you exactly where you'd be sitting. So if you are trying to film the other sideline, you'll know if you would be capable of doing that or not. I doubt any of you actually need to film the other sideline. So just go to the app, use the code Staples and get $20 off your first purchase. So download the Game Time app, find your game, your concert, your comedy show. Use that code Staples, $20 off your first purchase. Game Time. But so you brought up the NCAA thing and what they might do. And I keep coming back to the fact that the last time they went outside their normal disciplinary procedure to punish somebody was Penn State with Sandusky. They had to walk that back because it got taken to court. I'm guessing they're not going to do anything like that. And so I was going over the timeline today. Like in a normal NCAA case, the NCAA gives a notice of allegations. The school has 90 days to respond to that. The NCAA then has 30 days to respond to the response. And then you have Committee on Infractions hearing. So at the very least, you were talking about 4 months. Now, you don't have to take that long, but if I'm Michigan, of course I'm going to take that long.
Yeah, you want this to play out. And, you were talking, I think it was you or somebody else who was talking, everybody's talking about vacating games and stuff like that. And that usually doesn't happen unless there are ineligible players and things like that. So could this be a situation where at the end of the year, they say, okay, we're going to offer up Jim Harbaugh. He goes back to the pros anyway. And the NCAA, like Tennessee, says, all right, your head coach isn't there anymore. And, that's enough. Maybe we slap on some recruiting restrictions or something like that. Who knows? But nobody can predict these things, right, when it comes to the NCAA. But there's absolutely no way, I think, if they were to approach them and say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, we're going to make an exception in your case, would Michigan say, sure, we're fine with that? I'm sure they would take it to court. You know what? Go out and win the Big Ten and win their championship or whatever, and go from there. So, but that, as of right now, based on what we've heard, if they are saying, okay, if they get their notice of allegations tomorrow or next week or whatever, then they will proceed accordingly. But they want to hear right now what the evidence is from the NCAA.
And also, you mentioned the Big Ten, and that's what you've seen. So Adam Rittenberg from ESPN was reporting that according to the bylaws, the Big Ten commissioner,
Yeah.
Tony Petitti, has power to do this stuff, but there's no precedent for it really. And it's hard to imagine because, and this is one of those things we were talking about the other day where college football being governed by these little fiefdoms called conferences, as opposed to having a centralized structure. I would think this protects Michigan in a way, because why would the Big Ten want to knock out one of its own title contenders?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? And they shouldn't. And, of course, you got your Michigan fans saying, "You're all the Big Ten has it out for us," and so on and so forth. And no, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm guessing the networks might have something to say about it too, Andy, if you think about it and all the money that they've got invested into this and the numbers that Michigan's going to put up from here on out and has all year. So, somebody reporting that this is something that somebody has the ability to do. People need to keep in mind that is not something that people are planning to do. And I think that everybody sees that and says, "Ooh, Adam Rittenberg is saying this is what the Big Ten is going to do." No. And in fact, it's highly unlikely.
It's a huge step that they've never taken before.
Right.
So it would take some serious, gumption to do that. And yeah, that you're right. That just because you have the ability to do it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to, because that in and of itself creates a whole bunch of other issues. Because again, it is one of your own members. You would be punishing one of your own members that could potentially help the league by winning stuff. And so it is, it is a mess. And so you brought this up. I want to mention it because Michigan fans get all over me when I mention the idea that Jim Harbaugh might not be the coach there next year. But we've talked about this a bunch of times. He's tried to get NFL jobs the last 2 years. He's clearly got the itch to try to go back and win that Super Bowl. He's played, he's coached in a Super Bowl. He's coached in 3 NFC championship games. He was a very good NFL coach. And it does seem like he wants to try to conquer that level. And that probably was going to happen independent of all this. But now it seems like it might actually be helpful to Michigan to say, okay, please find one of those.
Right. And it's not out of the realm of possibility at all. In fact, some would argue that it is the path of least resistance here, right? Okay, if Jim Harbaugh is going back to the NFL and he wants to go back to the NFL, and he was going to, he was asking about a new contract. He's saying, why haven't I gotten one? We reported that a couple of weeks ago that, hey, all of a sudden, they put the wheels in motion, and it shouldn't have gone so far with him, frankly. He should have had it a long time ago. But there's no question, speaking to people close to him, that there still is that NFL itch. People get mad at you, right? If you go back to what we wrote a couple years ago about the Minnesota Vikings job, he went up there thinking he had the job, Andy, and I think a lot of people did, and that was after a Big Ten championship. Here now he's got this program at the pinnacle, and you know what? So an NFL team would be stupid not to hire him. Maybe not, they might look at this and say, okay, this is a stain on him, but people still want to win. That's the thing, the bottom line. And
Bill Belichick still coaches in the NFL and had a similar issue. So
right. And you know what? And there's no question. You look at his record, there aren't very many people, him and Pete Carroll and who else, who have had that success at the NFL and collegiate levels.
Yeah. And that's what I think is really interesting, because like you said, if all of what we've seen reported, it winds up being true, Michigan may have to kind of beg for mercy in that situation. But we look at Tennessee, where they sacrificed Jeremy Pruitt and some assistants. Were like, here, take them, punish them as harshly as you want, and we'll pay some fines. Now, the difference was Jeremy Pruitt was losing, and Tennessee wanted a way to fire him without paying him.
Yeah.
I don't imagine Michigan wants to lose Jim Harbaugh at this point.
No, and I think there are some in the administration, given the allegations now, and probably especially with what's coming out recently, if true, that would say, okay, enough's enough, and this can't happen, and we're embarrassed, because that's Michigan as well, right? The holier than thou, and we do things better, and so I think going in and speaking to our sources, there was a split. There were people that said, okay, let's sign Jim and say, forget the NCAA and let's go forward. And then there were others were saying no, we don't want to extend him. So, we'll see where this goes now at this point, but certainly clearly more for them to think about. And we will know more when the NCAA presents this to Michigan and how Michigan responds to it. But I can promise you that Michigan's not going to come out guns blazing and say, like maybe an SEC school or something, like, and say, hey, forget you. This is our guy. We're going to rally behind him.
The North Carolina defense.
Right.
Which,
Or Kansas with Bill Self, right? I
yeah.
mean, yeah, rally around a guy like that.
But it worked in both
Yeah.
those cases. It's interesting though with this one because there is the other case involved. I know they got a draft notice of allegations in January. Did they ever get the real notice of allegations in that
No,
case?
no, and they still don't have a notice of investigation for this case. So maybe that's what the NCAA is going to do when they visit with them, is drop that on them along with the notice of investigation. Or maybe they have the notice of allegations and maybe they've known this all along. But it's fascinating because, now you've got all these theories about the NCAA leak and how he might be linked to Michigan, might be a Michigan alumnus. It's getting nuttier and nuttier. And that's why I always say, when Michigan fans ask me, has the worst come out yet? I'm like, you better wait and see what tomorrow brings,
It feels like just an drips and drabs. And that's what I've tried to explain to people. It's not that everybody is just gleefully tap dancing on Michigan here. The reason all of this is coming out the way it is it involves so many different schools. It involves most of the Big Ten. You've got 3 big time SEC schools. You've got Clemson, you've got Oregon. All of those people then converge on their message boards, and you get the message board. Like we unearthed the VolQuest posts from last night from December and January, where somebody just described this to them, and they're like,
yes,
sounds kind of weird, but this is what the guy told me, and it was 100% true.
Crazy. And it's out there. And you know what? And here's the thing. It didn't have to happen. You know what? Somebody 2 years ago said, when they went back and they were thinking about changing the rule, that part of the language was, it's a minimal competitive advantage because 75 to 80% of teams are sign stealing in some form or another. And it's naive to believe that, most teams aren't doing this in some form,
Well, 100% of them are trying to do it
in
game at least. Yeah.
Right. So, exactly. But to what extent, we don't know. But I can promise you there are teams out there doing it to the extent, probably, at least in terms of getting film and studying it. I'm not saying sending people around the country and
they don't have the travel budget for that.
Exactly, the travel budget. But that's an interesting one too. Who's funding it? I think that's probably the next logical question.
Yeah.
And where's that going to go? So it's going to be fascinating to watch and certainly disappointing.
Well, and I thought the Richard Johnson story in Sports Illustrated on Connor Stalions, I thought might help if Michigan was going to do a one person went rogue strategy. The guy with the 600-page manifesto is a very good candidate to say he went rogue, but unfortunately, this seems like it was incredibly sloppy, and there's a lot of paper trail, and that's the thing. I mean, all of these things kind of get undone by sloppiness more than anything else.
Yeah, and let's see, how did they access these computers? Who hired the private investigating firm? Gee, I wonder. Yeah, and and how did they? And who accessed it? And what proof do they have that these coaches were accessing it? And everything else. That's the funny part to me. Is like, how are you getting this from a private investigating firm? And what lengths are they going to bust your operations? So it's pretty nutty. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, this has gone into some dark places, but hey. This is it's a multi-billion-dollar business, so not surprising. But it is interesting because the more and more I think about it, and so I want to run this by you again because you did mention this earlier. Do we think this will be Jim Harbaugh's last year coaching Michigan?
At this point, with what just came out now, I would not be surprised at all. Again, knowing and speaking to people that I speak to and what and how they feel, I know that there is a faction there that thinks that Michigan, they don't want to extend him even, people in power. And then you have some that are behind him. But I do know the president Santaono is taking it very seriously and believes this is very serious. So I would not be shocked at all.
Well, I imagine he's going to try to go, if that happens, he's going to try to go out holding up that big trophy at the end of the year. So we shall see. That's the other piece of this. They're still playing. They're still mashing everybody. So
and they're mad, Andy. It feels like they feel like it's them against the world. And the funniest part, the rivals are saying, of course, 2022, look at Donovan Edwards pointing. There was a report that Ohio State knew about this, and a coach went on record saying, we knew about this going into the 2022 game. Well, then shame on you for, number one, not going and kicking the living crap out of them with fake signals. And number two, getting beat 45-23 in your own stadium. You acknowledge that you knew about it. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse for the 49-0 nothing but kicking that you put on another rival, but it doesn't matter. They're gonna have that stain on them for the rest of their lives.
Well, a lot of good memes have come out of this. One of the great memes that has come out of this is the one where you have an Ohio State coach holding up a sign that says "Don't tackle Donovan."
Yeah, yeah. Like everybody knew what the play was on those two, didn't they?
Yeah. So I mean, it is going to be a very fascinating next few days, weeks, months. But you're right. The on field part of it is this is a Well, let me put it this way. This is a team that just beat somebody 49-0. And they're madder than that now.
Right.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I want to make it clear. My opinion on the Jim Harbaugh thing is based on what I know about Michigan and how they handle these things. Right.
Mhm.
And if there is, if they say, okay, if this is what it's going to be to get us in the least amount of trouble, this isn't going to be them rallying around to Bill Self or anybody, Roy Williams or anything like that. You know what? They're going to try to protect the brand.
Well, that Block M is a very strong brand. So, Chris Balas, thank you so much.
Anytime, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.